Hi, and welcome to the Olive Branch Community Church. My name is Kathy, and it's so good to be with you here today. Today, at our church in person, we're having a huge kickoff of our life groups. These are our small groups where we have a chance to get to know each other on like a deeper level. Some people are like, I don't want people to get to know me on a deeper level. I know, it's a risk, but the truth is, when we allow people in and we get into other people's lives, we have a chance to grow deep in our faith, because God never meant for us to do life alone. And so I encourage you to, I know you're at home, so you're not in church, but you can check us out on our website, tob.ca/life groups, and find out all about the different life groups we have available. Some of them are surrounded around studies. Some of them are surrounded around stage of life. So like we have a young families life group, and they accommodate all the things that, usually we have challenges about, when we have small children. Oh, we're gonna get a babysitter in order to be able to go to this life group. No, it's all rolled up in one. You can bring your kids and they have their own activity during that time. Anyway, so check it out and you will not be disappointed. It is the way to get really plugged in. Today, Pastor Ken kicks off a new message series, and it is going to be great because it's going to be talking about, what is it we Christians believe. Sometimes, we're confused about some certain, topics and not sure what we believe about certain things. And this is going to be covering that kind of stuff. And so it's going to lay a great foundation for us to continue to build our faith. And so even if you've been a Christian a while, these are all wonderful things to reorient ourselves around. But anyway, God bless you. Let's spend some time in worship and then really dig into the Word.
Good to be back, and if you're wondering why I'm dressed like this, it's because it's the last Sunday of summer. Hard to believe, isn't it? Huh? Next week, we're going to be into fall. We're starting a new series today. It's called Under the Surface: What Christians Believe and Why It Matters. Now, how many of you have been raised with one of these? Cell phone. Many of you have, okay? Some of us have been raised with this, okay? This is a wonderful thing called the telephone, okay? So this is how we used to have to call. In fact, this was, kind of an updated version here because you had actually the numbers and the buttons and you could press rather than dial. And so there are lots of you, like when people talk about a dial tone, you've never heard one in your life. Or when talk about hanging up, you've never actually hung up a phone. You've never actually picked up the phone. You've turned yours on or whatever. So these are amazing. And most of you have one, a smartphone or an iPhone. And when you look at this, like from the outside, like if you, were from the 1950s and somebody came, back in time, 73 years, and they showed you one of these things, you'd think, well, it's just a black blob. That's all it is, with glass on the surface of it. But it's under the surface that makes a difference, right? That's why you never leave home without it. It's this amazing thing that you carry with you because it connects you with the world. It connects you, with things. You can watch movies on this thing. You can store thousands of photographs on this thing. You can make movies with one of these. You can find information about anything that you want to find. You can find directions to just about anything except Mars on the cell phone, because what's under the surface here, what's under the surface of this thing is important. And you probably wouldn't understand it if you saw it. There'd be all kinds of transistors and wires and little tiny speakers and little tiny microphones and things like that. But what is under the surface of this is what makes it powerful, what makes it work, what makes it one of the most desirable things in the world. Now, here's my thought, okay? If you and I are going to represent Jesus in this world, which we are called to do, and if you're not a follower of Jesus, I get that, you're not necessarily called to do this, but if you are a follower of Jesus, you and I are called to represent him to the world. And what that means is it would be really important for you and I to understand what's beneath the surface. Because in a lot of our world, what they see when they hear Christianity or when they just see the surface of it, they see kind of my cell phone has all kinds of cracks and chips in the surface of it and so on. That's all they see, buttons and things like this. Maybe they see a picture of a church and a steeple with a cross on it, and people, who sometimes don't live out what they believe, and people who sometimes are mean and crabby instead of loving. That's sometimes what people see on the surface. So what we are going to be talking about is going to be really important. And I think it's going to be helpful for you. For example, have you ever wondered why followers of Jesus would be confident enough to go to death, understanding that they have total confidence in what's going to happen on the other side? Why they would be willing to give their lives away, why they would be willing to give their money away and give their time away. Well, we're going to talk about that. Have you ever wondered about the Trinity, and why we, believe in something that seems so obscure and so outdated and so weird at times, Have you ever wondered why churches are so different from one another? Why, in some places you got smoke and candles and robes and altars and everything, and then on the others you got rock music, and people swinging from the chandeliers. I mean, what's the difference? Why is there a difference? What about the Bible, I'm sure you have people, who have all kinds of opinions about what the Bible is, and so, there's other holy books out there. Why is the Bible special? Why is what it teaches important? And what about the end of the world? 666, the mark of the beast, and dragons with multiple heads and horns and just all this stuff. Like, what's up with that? Well, we're going to be talking about that. Now, here's what I want and expect of you. I expect you to think hard. Don't check your brain at the door. Just ask questions. And I would just encourage you, you may have friends who have questions about Christianity and you want them to understand what it is. Find out their questions, like send them to me, let's have a turkey shoot. I'll be the turkey. But let's ask questions, let's dig in, and let's take a look at this, because I'm convinced that what you're going to learn is really going to help you. It's going to help you understand why life matters, why your life matters, and why the people of God in this world matter. So let's start at the beginning. A very good place to start, as Mary Poppins said, what we believe about God. What do we believe about God? Now, the sacred writings are pretty clear, okay, on this. And it's like, God is. That's where the Bible starts. In the beginning, God. No explanation, no, well, let's, give you 5 reasons why God exists. No, it just says, God is, just to put it as simply as possible. So here's what we know. 95% of the people in the world believe in God in one form or another. So 95% of the people believe in God. Now, that doesn't mean that they're right, but it means, okay, there's enough stuff out there that, that helps us understand that. In his book, There Is a God, Anthony Flew, guy was one of the most convincing atheists who ever lived. So at the age of 83, he tells us in this book why he decided to believe that there's actually a God. And I'll tell you what it was. It was the human genome. It was like, all of this information which looked a lot like a language to him. And he said, I don't think this could just spring out of nowhere, which actually makes sense. But belief in God is actually different than faith in God. The author of Hebrews writes this: what is faith? It's the confident assurance that what we hope for is going to happen. It's the evidence of things that we cannot yet see. God gave his approval to people in the days of old because of their faith. By faith, we understand that the entire universe was formed at God's command, that what we now see did not come from anything that can be seen. So, you see, it is impossible to please God without faith. Anyone who wants to come to him must believe that there is a God and that he rewards those who sincerely seek him. Now, every single person in this world puts their faith in something or someone. Okay, everybody does, It's like Bob Dylan. Remember his song, Everybody's Got to Serve Somebody? Everybody does. We all serve somebody, even if it's ourselves. Now, some people say, I don't believe in God. And I would like to ask the question, so which God do you not believe in? Because I probably don't believe in them either, I mean, sometimes, people see God as kind of the ultimate party pooper, if it tastes good, spit it out. If it feels good, don't do it, and he's kind of mostly angry all the time. Well, I don't believe in that God either, if that's the God that you don't believe in. If you grew up in a legalistic home and you're surrounded by judgmental people, that may be the God that you see, but that's not God. Some people see God as just basically irrelevant. He kind of floats around the universe. The concept for that is deism, very popular back in the 18th century, that believed that God kind of created everything, immensely powerful, wound it up, and turned it loose like a self-propelled lawnmower. And it just keeps grinding on, and it mows grass, and it mows houses, and it mows down people and bunnies and everything else. So some people see God as, he's irrelevant, he's kind of old-fashioned, he doesn't understand TikTok or Instagram or anything like that. So I don't believe in that God either. That's not the God that I believe in. Sometimes pain. We've talked a lot about pain in these last few months, Pain sometimes causes people to believe that God is this sadistic person who enjoys, torturing people. That's not the God that I believe in either. Now, there are 2 more sources, as I see it, for belief in God. And there's the telescopic source, which looks out to the farthest reaches of the universe, and then there's the microscopic source. So this is what Paul wrote to the Romans. He said, they, in other words, the people of the world, know the truth about God because he has made it obvious to them. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power, and his divine nature, so they have no excuse for not knowing God. So let's take a look at the telescopic view of God, okay? Telescopic view of God, we now know this, and they didn't know it back then, but there are 13.2 billion light years in spreading across the universe, the known universe, and it's probably bigger than that. That's what we can see. And there are 200 sextillion stars that we know of. That's a billion trillion stars. This is a number that you can't even begin to fathom. And that includes, Betelgeuse, which is basically 700 miles across. This is an immense, immense, immense universe. And you're talking about a God who threw this all into space. And it had a beginning, okay? Like they used to say that, matter is eternal, the universe has always existed. There were a lot of disappointed people when they discovered the Big Bang that, about 13.5 billion years ago or 13.8 billion years ago, the whole thing came into existence. Then there's the microscopic view. Now, when Darwin looked at the cell, the human cell, he saw what he called the simple cell. In other words, there was kind of this circle with a blob in the center. There is no such thing as a simple cell. What we now know because of the electron microscopes is that every cell is kind of like a little factory, and it can replicate itself, every 60 to 100 and 360 minutes, okay? The human genome has 100,000 genes in it. So this is just astounding. This is why Anthony Flew looked at this whole thing and he says, there has to be a God. There's no other explanation. Time runs out on all other explanations of this. So you can see that he exists, okay? We can see that he exists. But the question is, and this is called general revelation. Like, you can look at all this. Anybody can look at this evidence and think, okay, there's something behind this. Why is there something rather than nothing? Because things just don't spring into existence, Nobody ever looks at their cell phone in the morning and says, wow, there was kind of a mutation in all the electric genes in our house, it created this cell phone, and look at it, isn't it amazing? Nobody thinks that. When you see something absolutely sophisticated and immense, you don't just say, it just happened, okay? But there's special revelation. And this is really important, okay? Special revelation is, well, let me just use this example. You can look at the outside of me, okay? And you can see that, wow, Ken must be at least 50 years old, ha, ha, ha. And he has green eyes and white hair, and so on. There are certain things that you can tell. You can tell my race, you can, tell my age. You can probably take a fairly good guess at my weight, although muscle does weigh more than fat. So you just have to take all these things into consideration. But what you don't know is the names of my mom and my dad. You probably don't know the name of my brother and my sister. You probably don't know how many nephews and nieces I have. You probably don't know what Ken Davis was like back, in junior high school, Wilson Junior High School in Erie, Pennsylvania. There are things that you don't know about me and that you could never guess just by looking at the exterior, and the same as with God. You can't guess. And I don't want people looking at the exterior of my life, you don't either, and just making stuff up, what they think about me, what they think about who I am and what I'm like and everything, by looking at the exterior. It's called prejudice when that happens. And you can't look at the exterior of what God has made and pass judgments on him either. You need special revelation. So the special revelation tells us what God is actually like. It's what you would never know about God necessarily by looking at just what he's made and so on. So the special revelation of God is that Jesus shows up here, and it tells us the Word. In other words, the very beginning of everything that's out there, the pre-existence of everything that's out there, the Word became flesh. All of a sudden, God is right there in our faces. He moved into the neighborhood, and he begins to show us what God is really like. And so we have the Bible, and we're going to be talking about that more next week. The Bible, or the Holy Writings, divided into the Jewish scriptures, which basically reveal and prophesy about Jesus coming, and then the New Testament, which tells us who Jesus was and how he acted and what he did and what he promised for us. So one of the things that you would never know about God, for example, is that he's compassionate and loving. You look at Jesus' life, and that's what he was like every single day. He was compassionate, he was kind, he was loving, he was firm. That's what God is like. That's something that we would never know by just looking at the universe and looking at the human cell. Now, what do these authors say about God, okay? Well, there are almost 4,000 references to God in my concordance, okay? And they present this amazing picture of God. The word, he many times reveals himself by the name. For example, he reveals himself to Moses as Yahweh. I am that I am. In other words, God is. God is. God always has been. God always will be. God is. He simply defines existence. We find out that he's the healer of human bodies. He says, I will be your healer. We find out that God cares about our health. We find out that God cares about us having enough. Jesus said, why are you worrying about food and clothing? God cares for the birds, he'll care for you. And I could go on, that he's the God who's always present, that he's the rock that we stand on, that he's our fortress, that he's the one who sees history. He began history, and he will call it to an end some point in the future. So he's the one who controls it all. We find out that God's active. He's not off, adjusting the twinkle on stars. He's engaged in our lives. He's described with verbs. He's guiding and revealing and giving, and saving and helping and working with us. He's always active. What surprises people is that he's interested in all the details of our lives. Now, generally speaking, people who are great people, important people, big people, have lots of money, they aren't interested in the details of your lives. I can guarantee you that Jeff Bezos is not going to call you on the phone and say, by the way, how's Amazon working for you, Leon Musk is not going to call you and ask, so how's your new Tesla going? And I'm really interested. Please tell me all the details about it, because they just don't. But God is so massive and so big and so all-encompassing that he's big enough to care for the biggest things across 13.2 billion light years of universe and still care about the chromosomes in your body. And his plans are better than ours. His thoughts are higher than ours. It doesn't surprise us, right? But sometimes we forget that and we come up with our own plan, instead of his, and say, well, God bless my plan. That just doesn't work. And he not only cares about you deeply, he not only knows you, he cares about you and he cares for you. He knows what you run on. He knows that you run on joy. He knows that you run on meaning. He knows that you run on love. And he wants to pour those into your life. Here's the best way I can say it. God is for you. He's more for you than anybody in your life has ever been, including your mama, because he knows you better. And he's able to love you more than she ever did. Now, let me give you what I believe are the dominant characteristics and attributes of God, especially in his personal relationship with us. And the first one is God is love. It's very clear. Apostle John, who learned this from Jesus, says God is love. So, if you read, the definition of love as Paul gave it, and this often gets read at weddings, love is patient. Well, God is patient. Love is kind. God is kind. It does not envy or boast, and it's not rude. God doesn't envy or boast, and he's not rude. He's not self-seeking. He's not easily angered. He doesn't keep a record of our wrongs. And he rejoices with the truth. And he always protects and trusts and hopes and perseveres. God never fails. Love never fails. God is love. God is also faithful. We overpromise and underdeliver sometimes as human beings. It's kind of the nature of how we do it. But when you read through the scriptures, what you find out is God is faithful. He doesn't promise that he'll forgive and not do it. He doesn't promise us eternity with him and not do it. He is faithful to what he says. He never underpromises. He never overpromises and underdelivers. And the third thing is that God is holy. And this is hard for us to understand a little bit, okay? I bet some of you, like me, have misunderstood this. And you see God as kind of the ultimate OCD God, and he's squeaky clean, and he's judgmental, and he's nasty, 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 don't get dirty, that kind of stuff, especially on issues of sex, and money and stuff like this, because according to that, I never measure up. But that's not what it's talking about. What that means is that he is astoundingly perfect and beautiful. For example, if you're looking for a diamond, you want one with 4 C's, right? It has color, it has clarity, it has cut, it has, the carat weight. So that's what you're looking at, okay? So you want, 5 stars and all those things. That's what a perfect holy diamond would be. God is undiluted excellence. And here's the cool thing. That's what he wants to make of you, and that's what he wants to make of me. That's going to happen someday. Not in this life, but in the next one, okay? Now, when it comes to what we believe about God, we would be under the, we're theists. In other words, we believe in God, okay? But we're monotheists. In other words, we believe about God that there's one God. That's how he's revealed himself. An atheism, you don't believe that there's a God. In other words, he just isn't there. Agnosticism basically says, well, there's just not enough evidence to prove that there's a God, so I'm going to withhold judgment until I drop into the grave. Polytheism is believing that there are many gods out there. Just choose one, With the Roman culture, you choose the god of Mars if you want, if you want effectiveness in war, or you choose, another god. Depending on what you want, make sacrifices to that god to get it. Pantheism is believing, well, everything's God. You know, the trees are God, the lakes are God. You know, if you pollute the lakes, you're offending God. Well, you may be offending God, but you're not offending him by offending the lake, okay? And then, care of Shirley MacLaine, there are me-theism. There are people who think, well, I'm God. I'm the center of the universe, I'm the one who matters. I'm God. And that's actually part of pantheism. Now, Jesus revealed God. And this is interesting because he talked about his Abba. He prayed to the Abba, Father, all the time. In other words, he says, I talk to my Father in heaven. I talk to him about everything. So he's the Father. He's the Son of God. And he later on, in one of the passages in the book of John, chapter 8, he says, I am, calls himself the I am. So he's claiming to be God. He says, Father and I are one, In John chapter, 16, I believe it is, he says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And then the Bible, especially the New Testament, talks about the Spirit of God. So, we believe in the Trinity, and if you've read a doctrinal statement, it sounds like this: there's one God, eternally existent in three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Okay, and that's basically, Jesus is God. He said he was, and did all the things that God does, forgave sins and so on. Abba is God, the Father is God, we believe that, and then the Spirit of God is the one who comes and lives in us and changes us, and the one that empowered Jesus' ministry. So we believe that he is God. So there's one God, but somehow he exists in three persons. And this is hard to wrap your head around, okay? If I could understand God, I wouldn't worship him, okay? So it's way beyond. There's always going to be mystery associated with God. And the only thing that I can think of that actually, could kind of demonstrate this a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit is H2O. Okay, now you know what H2O and what it stands for? It's water, right? And if you fill a test tube with water, freeze it in the freezer, okay, and then put it under a Bunsen burner, there's a point in time in which there's ice at the bottom, there's water in the middle, and then there's steam at the top. It's all H2O, but, that's it. So that's maybe the best explanation. People have used the egg, there's the yolk, and then there's the white, and then there's the shell, and it's like, okay, I don't think that works. But anyways, it's pretty hard for us to get our heads around it because it's so different, okay, when it comes to that. Here, I'll tell you what the big issue is. It's, will you put your faith in God? Will you put your faith in God? See, there's no author of Scripture anywhere who writes, well, is there a God or not? I don't know. I better look at the evidence. No, they assume that he exists. He put everything together, including every cell in my body. By definition, God is way beyond our comprehension. But what the Scriptures ask isn't, is there a God? It says the demons believe that there's a God. So, believing in God is not a big deal, okay? They know it. They've seen him. The question is, will you trust him? Is he your God? Or do you have some little g God that you're worshiping off in the shadows someplace, whether it's money or whatever it happens to be? James, the brother of Jesus, earthly brother of Jesus, half-brother, makes this very profound statement. He says, show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by what I do. In other words, it's intended to change how we live. You believe that there's one God, good. Even the demons believe that, and they tremble, they shudder. This passage is saying that, what we believe about God is intended not to be some kind of life-changing theory. It becomes real when we put our faith in him, when we put our hope in him. Passage we read from Hebrews 11 says that without faith it's impossible to believe. It's impossible to please God. And it records a whole bunch of people who many times staked their lives, gave up their lives, inconvenienced themselves because of what they believed in God. And the author of Hebrews continues, anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists. That's the, demons do that, okay? Believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. That's the question. Do you believe that God rewards those who earnestly seek him? Is that what you believe, down to the core of your being? James says, you believe in God, good. Demons believe and they tremble. But seeking him earnestly, sincerely seeking him is something totally different. It's totally different. And it will mean that there will, never be a single sacrifice or a single, difficult decision that you make to please that he will not in some way reward. It's called trust. I believe that God loves me and knows me and sees what I do, and that somehow he's going to work through this and work in my life. Is that what you believe about him? So I want to ask you this morning, do you believe that God's faithful? Do you believe that he's fair? Do you believe that he's worth inconveniencing yourself for? Do you believe that he's worth even giving money for? Do you believe that he's worth, serving and honoring and taking the time that you have in this life to serve him? See, the way this works, the core question is Jesus worth the trouble? We talked a little bit about that last week. We talked about, the theology of the tough stuff. You're going to go through trouble. And the question is Jesus worth the trouble? Or is it like just basically, okay, Jesus, you go do your thing. I'm just going to sit in my house and I'm going to order everything in and everything will be fine and so on. Is Jesus worth the trouble of actually earnestly seeking him and serving him with your life? See, that really says a lot about what you and I believe. And it gets down to God and me, or me and God. God's kind of like the little servant, to come out and he helps me with what I do and stuff like this. But my life really is about me. So that's what it really gets down to in our lives. That's what it gets down to. Now, I'm going to get painfully specific here, okay? And some of you may hate me for this and so on. If you do, don't throw things or send junk mail or anything like that. Let me explain it like this. Back in 2020, most of us know that fear was introduced at just about every sector of our world. Fear was the name of the game. We heard it every day from the TV, we heard it from newscasters, don't breathe other people's air, don't touch other people's stuff, and it was the fear of death. And rightly so, we needed to, think about, okay, we've got to be careful. We don't want this to spread. We don't want to hurt people. But what happened is we actually became worshipers, and that's what this little figure is. I don't know if you can see it or not. There was a preoccupation with safety. I want to survive till I die, with having enough money because it affected everybody's money, and then convenience. I want things to be convenient. I want the Amazon life. I want people to deliver it to my door, within at least a day. I want it to come to my door. What has happened since then, and I think what is going on in 2023, you feed anything and it grows. And I'm telling you, whatever God you worship, whether it's money or whether it's safety or whether it's convenience or whether it's just being able to stay home and do your thing and stuff, you feed that God and it will grow. While I was gone, Jeremiah talked a little bit about, how there's a throne in your life, and there's this chair, and we are not familiar with that. It's kind of an antiquated and antique term, okay, for what happens, and it's the king, and we don't really have kings anymore. But I'm telling you, there is a throne in your heart. There is a place in your heart where something sits and runs the show, and it's Lord, and it may not be Jesus, and it may not be God. It may be money, and in our culture, it's safety. I got to be safe no matter what. I got to preserve my money, and I've got to make life convenient. And that's the little g God. And I'm telling you, you worship that little g God, and it will continue to grow. And what happens, you see, is that we put God in a box, and we have like a little box like this in our lives, and we keep God in there because we don't want him to escape, because God is not safe. God is not, he can make life inconvenient at times. So we want to keep him safe in the box here. And then when we, lift up the lid, we want him to basically come out and, do tricks for us on the top of the box. And he's not like that. His question is not, what can I do for you today? His question is, will you love me? Will you serve me? Will you respect me? Because you see, whenever we put anything before God in our lives, it's an act of disrespect. It basically is, God, you're not worth worshiping, but I will worship your gifts. I will worship, what you do in the world and so on, but, you're not worthy of my worship and you're not worthy of my service. And so I'm going to serve me. And hopefully that'll work for you. And what you find out is that, if your thing is about keeping your life safe, like surviving till you die, Well, there's a lot of you that use faith. I mean, this past summer, you got into a plane, and you didn't check to see how much fuel was on the plane, and you didn't check to see if the ailerons were working or not, or if the flats were in place, and you didn't, give the pilot, he or she, a breathalyzer test to find out if they were drunk. You just got on the plane, and you put your life in their hands. Some of you, maybe this past summer, maybe this past year, you went into the OR and they took you in on a, metal cart and so on, and then they put you out. And when they put you out, people with masks came in with sharp instruments, and they began to cut into your body. And you didn't give the doctors or surgeons a breathalyzer test, You didn't go and check all the instruments and make sure all the germs were off of them. Like, you just kind of went for it. This past week, Lori and I went on a trip. We had to go out to Oakville to pick up something, so we're on our way out there. So, we go in by the airport, and there's this plane, and it's flying pretty low across the highway. And Lori says to me, she says, we've been watching too many Mayday shows, Is this thing going to make it across the highway, or is it going to crash into the highway and hit our car, I mean, we talked and laughed about that a little bit. We had barely gotten beyond that when there was a pickup truck up in front of us, and the lid that sometimes people will put on the back of the pickup truck, this thing all of a sudden flies up, and I see this thing turning around, like this sail, and it's like coming toward us. I can just imagine the corner of that thing going right through our windshield. Somehow it bypassed us, and we survived that. We thought, whew, oh man, that was a close one. So we're on our way back. It's dusk, the big jumbotron that they have up there on the highway. Let me just write up there what was on that jumbotron, okay? This will amaze you, It went something like this, okay? Become an organ donor today. And I thought, you know what? I don't mind donating my organs, but not today. Become an organ donor today. So we kind of laughed about that, and I thought, yeah, that's pretty appropriate, actually. Because life is uncertain. You don't know what you're going to get. Like Forrest Gump, life is like a box of chocolates. You don't know what you're going to get. And the question I want to close with is, will you trust God? Because I think that's what it really, it's not like, do you believe he exists? It's not like, do you believe he created the universe? Do you believe he created the human cell? Do you believe that he knows what he's doing? No. That's all theoretical. The question is, will you trust him? Will you trust him? See, faith is something that we do every day. We trust doctors, we trust cars, we trust teachers, we trust iPhones. We, trust that, when we, put our iPhone in the car and put it in the little holder, and hit maps, that it's going to tell us where to go. And we actually follow the woman's directions on the phone because that's what we believe. We use faith every single day. We believe if our home gets flooded, that the insurance is going to pay for it. We believe that if a deer runs across the road in front of us, that and we hit it, that the insurance is going to pay for the damage. Too bad for the deer, And God's message to us, I gave you your soul. I made you who you are for a reason. Will you live out your purpose? Or are you going to turn it in for convenience? Or you could turn it in for a nice safe life, where you die with a smile on your face at 90, with money in the bank, and you think you're going to be just fine. I know you believe that, you're going to be with me in heaven forever, and that's a good thing, and so on. But will you be with me here? Will you trust me here? Will you trust that I know what I'm doing with your life? Will you trust me? Will you trust me? Will you trust me with your kids? Will you trust me with your money? Will you trust me with your time? Will you trust me? And not some little G God that makes big promises and can't fulfill them. You need to know that I love you. I'm faithful. I keep my promises. And what I want for you is better than anything you can imagine. Let's pray. Thank you, God, for your goodness. We know you're great. All we have to do is look around and see it. We can see your power and your greatness everywhere. Help us to not just believe that you exist, but to believe that you reward people who earnestly seek you. Amen. So, ask your questions, hammer away, send them in. I'd like to know what they are. God is faithful, and he's greater than you can imagine, and he is worthy of your very best. Amen.